At my daughter's engagement dinner, I reached for my wine glass when my future son-in-law suddenly pushed it away and said, "I'm sorry, but I don't drink from a bottle that's been handled by someone who spends all day touching raw fish." The entire table fell silent. I didn't argue. I simply lowered my hand. Then my daughter stood up, connected her phone to the banquet hall's giant screen, and said, "Before anyone judges my father again, there's something everyone needs to see." Seconds later, my future son-in-law's face turned completely pale. "Thank you so much for stopping by, Dad's Revenge Stories. Your support means the world to me. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Please note, this tale incorporates creative fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. While settings or names may be crafted, the vital lesson behind this story is completely timeless. The parking lot of the Harborview Grand smelled like salt air and money, two things that had never mixed well in my experience. I sat in my truck for a moment after I killed the engine, looking at the building through the windshield. 12 floors of glass and granite, every window lit up against the December sky. A valet in a black coat was jogging toward a silver Mercedes that had pulled up ahead of me. I looked down at my boots. Rubber. Steel-toed. Still had a faint streak of brine along the left heel from the morning haul. I had gone home, showered, changed into a clean flannel shirt and my better pair of gray work pants, but the boots stayed. They always stayed. My daughter had called the night before, her voice carrying that careful steadiness she used when she was holding something back. "Dad, just come as you are," she had said. "Don't dress up, don't change anything. Promise me." I had promised, and I kept my promises. I climbed out of the truck and handed my keys to the valet, a young man who couldn't have been more than 22. He looked at the boots first, then at the truck, a 2009 Ford with a cracked side mirror and salt rust along the wheel wells, and then he looked at me with an expression that tried very hard to be neutral. "Good evening, sir," he said. "Evening," I said. "She runs a little rough in the cold. Give her a minute before you move her." He nodded, and I could see him recalibrating, trying to figure out what category of person drove a truck like that to a place like this. I didn't help him figure it out. I just walked toward the entrance. The lobby of the Harborview Grand was the kind of place designed to make a person feel the weight of their own ordinariness. Marble floors, a chandelier that dropped 15 feet from the ceiling, the faint smell of cedar and something floral that cost more per ounce than diesel fuel. Two women near the concierge desk glanced over at the sound of my boots on the marble, that particular rubber-on-stone squeak that no amount of money can make elegant. I kept walking. The front desk clerk, a young woman with her hair pulled back tight, started to say something as I passed. Then she stopped. She had looked at my face, and something there made her close her mouth and look back at her computer screen. I had spent 40 years on open water, and after a while the sea puts something in a man's face that's hard to explain and harder to argue with. The elevator opened at the 3rd floor into a carpeted hallway lined with soft wall sconces. I could hear voices behind the double doors at the end of the corridor, low conversation, the gentle percussion of silverware, the kind of ambient noise that costs $1,000 a plate to be part of. Emma found me before I reached the doors. She came around the corner fast, the way she used to run down the dock when she was 7 years old, and I was coming in from a 3-day trip. She had her mother's dark hair and her mother's way of moving, efficient, purposeful, like every step counted for something. She was wearing a deep blue dress and small pearl earrings that I recognized. They had belonged to her mother. She wrapped her arms around me and held on. "Dad." Her voice was tight in a way she was trying to hide. I held her for a moment. She smelled like the same shampoo she had used since college, something with lavender in it. My chest pulled in the familiar way it always did when I held her, this feeling of something vast and tender that I had never found the right words for. "You look good, Emma," I said when she stepped back. Her eyes moved over my face, checking something. "You look like you've been up since 4. 5, I said. We had a strong tide. She almost smiled. Almost. Her eyes were doing something complicated that I had learned to read over 31 years, a mix of determination and something that sat just beneath it, something she was not ready to name out loud yet. She straightened the collar of my flannel shirt with both hands, an unconscious gesture the kind mothers do and daughters inherit. "Stay calm tonight," she said quietly, her eyes on the collar rather than my face. "No matter what happens, can you do that for me?" My chest tightened. Not with worry, with recognition. Emma had always been the measured one, the one who thought 3 moves ahead before she spoke. That quality had made her a formidable corporate attorney. It had also made her, since she was about 14 years old, nearly impossible to surprise. She was not nervous tonight. She was ready. "What's going to happen?" I asked. She met my eyes then, and for just a moment, I saw it, a flash of something fierce and certain behind the careful expression. "Just trust me," she said, "like you always have." I nodded. I had trusted this girl with the truth of who I was since she was old enough to understand it. I was not going to stop now. She tucked her hand through my arm and we walked toward the double doors together. The banquet room opened up in front of us, round tables draped in white linen centerpieces, of white winter roses, candlelight, cutting against the darkness outside the tall windows. Through those windows, 3 floors down, I could see the harbor. The dock lights were on, casting yellow pools across the black water. I knew every light down there by its position. I knew the sound each cleat made in a northeasterly wind. I had built all of it. 43 years ago, I had started with 1 boat and a borrowed dock slip in Gloucester. I had worked until my hands bled in January, until my back gave me trouble in February, until I forgot what sleeping past 5 in the morning felt like. I had buried my wife 8 years ago, and I had kept working because the work was the one thing that made sense when nothing else did. I had never put my name on a building or my face in a magazine. I had just kept going out every morning, kept building, kept hiring people who needed work and paying them fairly for it. Nobody in this room knew any of that. And tonight, I intended to find out what happened when people believed I was nothing. The guests at the nearest table looked up as we passed. A man in a charcoal suit let his gaze drop to my boots and then flick back to his wife with a small private expression. A woman near the window tilted her head toward her companion and murmured something I did not catch. Emma's hand tightened slightly on my arm, but her face stayed composed. We were nearly to the head table when I felt it, a particular quality of attention, the kind that isn't curious or polite but something else entirely, something that measures. I had been felt that kind of gaze before, usually across a negotiating table from men who wanted what I had built and believed they could take it. I turned my head slowly, following the sensation. And that was when I saw him for the first time. He was standing at the head table with a glass of red wine in his hand, talking to 2 men in expensive suits, laughing at something with the easy confidence of a man who had never once doubted his right to take up space in a room. Ryan Walker, 34 years old. Emma had shown me a photograph when they first got engaged. A handsome face, good jaw, the kind of smile that photographed well. In person, that smile was even more practiced. It arrived on his face a half-second too fast, the way a reflex does before the mind has finished deciding whether it means it. He turned when Emma said his name and the smile came on like a light switch. "Mr. Carter?" He stepped forward with his hand extended, his posture open and welcoming, everything perfectly calibrated. "I'm so glad you made it. Emma talks about you constantly." I shook his hand. His grip was firm but brief, and I felt more than saw the almost imperceptible flinch as his palm met mine. My hands are not soft. They haven't been soft since I was 19 years old. He pulled back a fraction of a second, faster than a natural handshake ends, and his right hand dropped to his trouser leg, in what he probably believed was an invisible motion. It was not invisible. "Ryan," I said, "good to finally meet you in person." "Likewise, absolutely." His eyes moved across my shirt, my pants, my boots, and back to my face in under 2 seconds, a full inventory taken and filed. "Can I get you a drink?" "We have an excellent Bordeaux open, and the staff here really knows their wine list." "Club soda is fine," I said. "I've got an early morning." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite amusement, not quite contempt. Something that lived between those two things. "Of course," he said. "The Fisherman's schedule." He said it warmly. He said it like a man paying a compliment. But the word fisherman sat inside that sentence the way a splinter sits under skin you know exactly where it is. Before I could respond, a woman materialized at Ryan's elbow, the way a stage manager appears from the wings, precisely timed, utterly deliberate. She was dressed in a cream-colored blazer with a silk blouse beneath it, her silver hair sculpted into a style that required both money and maintenance. Her chin was lifted at an angle that suggested she had been practicing it since her 20s. This was Victoria Walker, Ryan's mother, a woman I had heard described exactly once when Emma mentioned her almost in passing. "She's very particular about appearances." I had understood at the time that Emma was being generous. Victoria's eyes moved over me the way a customs agent moves over luggage, efficient, practiced, already forming conclusions before the inspection was complete. "Mr. Carter." Her smile was the architectural kind, built to look warm without committing to it. "How lovely that you could join us. Emma said you'd be coming straight from work." "I came from home," I said. "I finished on the water around 3. "How industrious." She let the word settle. Ryan's grandfather was a self-made man as well. Real estate, of course, but he always said he admired men who worked with their hands. She paused, then added as though it were an afterthought. "In the early years, my jaw tightened, not enough for anyone to see, but enough for me to feel it. I had been in enough boardrooms and enough courtrooms adjacent situations to recognize a velvet insult when I heard one. Victoria Walker had just told me in 12 words that working with one's hands was something a man did before he became something better. Emma appeared at my side. "Mom said the table assignments are up front, Dad. Let me show you where you're sitting." She steered me gently toward the far end of the head table, and I saw immediately that my place card had been set at the very end, separated from the main cluster of seats by 2 empty chairs that felt less like a gap and more like a border. I sat down without comment. A chair at the end of a table had never bothered me. I had eaten standing up in a wheelhouse in December swells. Furniture arrangement was not something I had ever lost sleep over. But Emma's expression, as she looked at that place card, just for a fraction of a second, something moved through her eyes that she pulled back before it became visible. Pain, maybe. Or something older than pain. "You okay?" she asked quietly, her hand resting on my shoulder. "Right as rain," I said. "Go be with your guests." She squeezed my shoulder once and moved away. A waiter appeared and set a club soda in front of me. At the other end of the table, Ryan was holding court with his 2 friends, laughing again, his wine glass catching the candlelight. He glanced over once, just once, and the smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes recalculated. Victoria sat down 2 seats away. She unfolded her napkin with the deliberate care of someone who had been taught that small gestures revealed character. "So, Mr. Carter," she said, not quite looking at me, "how large is your operation exactly? Emma's always been a bit vague on the details." I lifted my club soda. "Large enough," I said. She let the non-answer hang in the air, then turned to the woman beside her and began a different conversation entirely, the social equivalent of a door being closed in someone's face. The appetizers were being set down across the table. Ryan lifted the wine bottle and began refilling glasses, working his way toward me with the slow, generous confidence of a man who felt completely at home. He reached the seat nearest to me and paused. A waiter had just placed a glass of Bordeaux in front of me, a courtesy pour, automatic, unrequested. Ryan looked at the glass. Then he looked at my hands wrapped around the club soda. His eyes stayed on my hands for just a beat too long, and something in the air changed. I had not planned to touch the wine. A waiter moved along the table with a bottle of Bordeaux, filling glasses in the automatic, practiced way of someone who had done it 1,000 times. He set a glass in front of me as a matter of course, not because I had asked, but because that was what you did when someone was seated at a table like this. I reached for it out of habit, the same reflex that makes a man reach for a mug on a boat when his hands need something to do. Ryan's hand shot out across the table. Not a grab, not a shout, just a firm, deliberate movement, the back of his hand catching the stem of the glass and tipping it sideways. The wine spread across the white tablecloth in a slow, dark bloom soaking into the linen like something irreversible. Every head at the table turned. Ryan straightened up and smoothed the front of his jacket, his expression arranged into something approximating regret. "My apologies," he said, his voice carrying easily across the table. "I should have said something sooner." He paused long enough for the pause to mean something. I can't drink from a bottle that's been handled by someone who spends all day working with raw fish. You understand how it is. Health considerations." He wasn't looking at me when he said it. He was looking at the tablecloth, at the spreading stain, as if that were the real problem here. The table went rigid. A woman 2 seats down set her fork against her plate with a small, careful click. One of Ryan's friends developed a sudden, intense interest in the centerpiece. Victoria reached for her own glass and took a composed sip, as if she were sitting in her own living room. I set both my hands flat on the table. My chest felt like someone had reached inside and wrung something out of it. Not anger, not yet, but the raw, hollow ache of a man who has just been told in front of a room full of people that his presence is a contamination. These hands. I looked down at them. 43 years of salt water and rope burn and January cold and every net pulled through every storm since I was 24 years old. These hands had signed the deed to the first dock I ever owned. They had held my wife's hand in the hospital room where she took her last breath. They had braided Emma's hair every morning until she was old enough to do it herself. Ryan turned to a young server who had been standing near the wall and beckoned with 2 fingers. "Could we get a full reset at this end of the table?" he said pleasantly. "New glasses, new place settings, everything." He glanced down at the wine-stained cloth. "And a fresh liner if you have one." The server, a kid maybe 19 with a bad haircut and a new uniform that didn't quite fit his shoulders yet, looked at Ryan. Then he looked at me. His face went through 3 different expressions in under 2 seconds, and what settled on it at the end wasn't professionalism. It was a look I recognized from decades of watching young men try to figure out how to behave when the adults around them were behaving badly. He was embarrassed. Not for me. For Ryan. "Of course, sir," the kid said, and he moved to collect the settings near me with the careful, deliberate motions of someone trying very hard not to look like he was doing what he was doing. I watched him work. I did not move. I did not push back my chair. I did not give Ryan Walker the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Emma's voice came from the other end of the table, low and controlled. "Ryan, it's fine, sweetheart." His tone was reassuring, like a man calming down someone who has overreacted. "Just being practical. That's not Emma." Victoria's voice was a closed door. One word and the subject was sealed. Emma's jaw tightened. I could see it from where I sat, the slight shift in her face, the way her chin lifted a fraction, and her eyes went somewhere very controlled and very interior. My daughter had her mother's grace under pressure. But I had also watched her grow up, and I knew what it cost her to use it. The young server finished replacing the settings near me and stepped back. He caught my eye for just a moment and gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. The kind one man gives another when words would only make things worse. I appreciated that more than he would ever know. Ryan lifted his freshly poured glass and took a slow, deliberate sip, his shoulders relaxed, his posture utterly at ease. He resumed his conversation with the man to his left, as if the last 4 minutes had been nothing more than a minor logistical adjustment. That was what told me everything I needed to know about Ryan Walker. Not the gesture itself, crude as it was, but the speed with which he moved past it. There was no discomfort in him, no awareness that he had done something a decent man would lie awake over. He had humiliated a 67-year-old man in front of a room full of people, gotten the tablecloth changed, and gone right back to his Bordeaux. My eyes moved to Emma. She was holding her water glass with both hands, her fingers wrapped around it firmly enough that her knuckles had gone slightly pale. Her face was composed beautifully, terribly composed, the way a face gets when a person has practiced that composure many, many times before tonight. That was when the real pain arrived. Not the dull ache of being insulted, something sharper. The understanding that this was not the first time my daughter had sat across a table and held herself together while the man she had agreed to marry said something that should have broken her composure entirely. She had been here before. She had learned how to survive it. My throat tightened in a way I hadn't expected. I breathed through it slowly, the way I breathed through weather on the water, steadily, without fighting it, waiting for the moment to pass and the next one to arrive. Whatever Emma had planned for tonight, I trusted her to see it through. But sitting at that end of the table with the fresh linen and the untouched place settings, I made myself one quiet promise. Whatever came next, I was going to stay in my seat and let my daughter finish what she had started. Victoria set her wine glass down with the delicate precision of someone who had been taught that how you handled objects revealed your breeding. "These things happen," she said to no one in particular, and everyone at once. "Different people have different standards of hygiene. There's no judgment in acknowledging that." She smoothed the edge of her napkin with 2 fingers, unhurried, serene. The serenity of a woman who had spent decades saying cruel things in pleasant tones and calling it honesty. Ryan nodded along, refilling the glass of the man to his left. "Exactly. I wasn't trying to make a point. I just have a sensitive stomach." "Of course you do, darling," Victoria said. I looked at her across the table and felt something harden in my chest. Not hatred, nothing as hot as that, but a cold and clarifying recognition. I had met women like Victoria Walker before, usually across legal tables in rooms where large amounts of money were being distributed. They were always impeccably dressed. They always smiled at exactly the right moments. And they always, without fail, found a way to let you know that your presence in their world was a charity they were extending rather than a right you possessed. Ryan leaned back in his chair and turned to the man beside him, a heavy-set fellow in a navy blazer who had introduced himself earlier as one of Ryan's business associates. "You know what Emma and I were discussing the other day?" Ryan said, his voice carrying that particular quality of a man who wants to be overheard while pretending he doesn't. After the wedding, we're thinking about consolidating some of the family's property holdings, streamlining things. The associate made an interested sound. There's a dock property, Ryan continued, up the coast. Working fishing operation. Honestly, he paused, swirling his glass. It's the kind of asset that made sense 40 years ago. But markets change. Land values up here have tripled in the last decade. Sitting on a working waterfront operation when you could liquidate and reinvest in something with actual returns. He shook his head with the gentle sorrow of a man watching someone else make a preventable mistake. It's just not smart money. My jaw ached. I realized I had been clenching it. After the wedding, I said, keeping my voice level, would be a decision for after the wedding, Ryan. That property isn't part of any discussion tonight. Ryan looked over at me with an expression of such practiced concern that I almost admired the craftsmanship of it. Mr. Carter, I only bring it up because I care about your financial security. A man at your stage of life, my stage of life, I said, involves getting up at 5 in the morning and running an operation that feeds about 400 families directly. So I'm not losing sleep over the financials. A flicker there, and gone moved across Ryan's face. Something that was not quite surprise and not quite irritation, but had elements of both. Victoria tilted her head, her earrings catching the candlelight. There are wonderful retirement communities along the Maine coast, Mr. Carter. Some of them are really quite lovely. Ocean views, organized activities. She paused with the timing of someone who had rehearsed the line, and I imagine it would be quite a relief to hand off the day-to-day responsibilities to someone younger, someone with fresh energy. The table had gone that particular kind of quiet that means everyone is listening and no one wants to be caught doing it. I appreciate the suggestion, I said, but I built what I built with the intention of keeping it. Ryan's associate had found something fascinating to study on his bread plate. The woman 2 seats down reached for her water glass and kept her eyes carefully forward. Ryan leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to a register that suggested intimacy while still being perfectly audible to everyone within 8 feet. Mr. Carter, I think you're a proud man, and I respect that. I genuinely do. But pride and practicality aren't always the same thing. He let that land. Emma's future is something I take seriously. Our family's financial stability is something I take seriously. And part of that means making sure we're not, how do I say this, carrying assets that have outlived their productive period. I looked at him steadily. My hands were folded on the table in front of me, not because I was calm, but because I needed them to be still. Are you calling me an asset that's outlived its productive period? I asked. Or just my dock? The associate made a small, involuntary sound that he converted quickly into a cough. Ryan smiled, the warmest, most disarming smile he had produced all evening. I'm saying that families evolve, and the people who love each other most are the ones who are willing to make hard decisions together. Victoria's hand touched Ryan's forearm briefly, a gesture of approval, maternal and satisfied, like a coach patting a player who has just executed a difficult play correctly. I turned my gaze to Emma. She was sitting very straight, her water glass in front of her, her expression arranged into a neutrality so complete it hurt to look at. But her right hand below the tablecloth edge was pressed flat against her thigh, pressed hard the way a person presses a bruise to feel something specific instead of something shapeless. She had heard these words before. That was not a new expression on her face. That was a practiced one. And that, more than anything, Ryan Walker had said all evening, made my chest pull tight, with a grief I had not anticipated, and could not fully name the grief of a father who understands too late and too clearly exactly how long his daughter has been carrying something alone. Ryan reached for the wine bottle and refilled his glass with the unhurried confidence of a man who believed the room had gone exactly the way he intended. His eyes moved to me once more over the rim, and what was in them was not warmth, not concern, not any of the things his voice had been performing for the last 10 minutes. It was the look of a man who was done being patient and was just beginning to get started. The main course arrived just as the conversation at the head of the table shifted into something lighter. Laughing at a story one of his associates was telling Victoria, accepting a second pour of wine with the gracious nod of a woman accustomed to being served. The waiter set a plate in front of me, and I looked down at it for a moment before I registered what was on it. Seared halibut, pan-roasted with a butter sauce and a scattering of fresh herbs across the top. I had pulled halibut out of the Gulf of Maine since before Ryan Walker was born. I had hauled it in 40-degree water with my hands so cold I couldn't feel the line. I almost laughed. Almost. I picked up my fork and started eating. Ryan cut his steak with the focused attention of a man who is deciding something. Then he set his knife down, picked up his wine glass, and turned toward me, with an expression I recognized from 100 business meetings, the particular arrangement of features that signals a man is about to ask something he has been holding back all evening. "Mr. Carter," he said. His voice warm measured the voice of a man having a reasonable conversation. "I hope you don't mind me asking, the dock property, the fishing operation, is that registered under your personal name, or do you have it structured as a business entity?" My fork paused over my plate for just a fraction of a second. Then I set it down and looked at him. "Why do you ask?" I said. He smiled, easy open, not even slightly embarrassed by the question. "Estate planning. Emma and I have been talking about it, just making sure everything is organized before the wedding. It's the responsible thing to do, getting ahead of these things." "I wasn't aware Emma had concerns about my estate planning," I said. Emma, seated at the head of the table, reached for her water glass and took a slow sip. She did not look at me. She did not look at Ryan. Her eyes went somewhere in the middle distance, and she held the glass with both hands, the way a person holds something they need to be steady. She wasn't going to step in. I understood that suddenly and completely, not because she didn't care, but because she was choosing not to. She was letting this run its course. For reasons I did not yet fully understand, my daughter needed me to sit here and let Ryan Walker keep talking. So I kept my voice easy and my face open. "I'm in good health," I said. "I appreciate the concern, but I don't think we're at the estate planning stage quite yet." Ryan nodded as if that were a perfectly reasonable answer that he was now going to set aside and ignore entirely. Of course. I just think it's smart to be proactive." He took a sip of wine. "Is the property the dock itself, the boats, is all of that held under the same umbrella, or are there separate entities?" "A few different structures," I said. "And the land itself?" His voice stayed pleasant, the tone of a man making small talk. "Is that titled to you personally, or is there a trust involved? Some families find a revocable living trust makes things much cleaner." "Ryan." I said his name the way I used to say it to deckhands who were pushing in a direction they shouldn't. Steady. Final. "I have an attorney who handles that. If there are legitimate legal questions before the wedding, he's the right person to talk to." Ryan's jaw shifted a tiny movement, the kind that happens when a man is recalibrating faster than his expression can catch up. He lifted his wine glass again and nodded as if the matter were entirely settled and he'd only been asking out of casual interest. "Absolutely," he said, "just looking out for Emma." "Emma," I said, "has always been well looked after." A beat passed. Victoria touched the edge of her napkin. Ryan's associate, the heavy-set man in the navy blazer, picked up his own fork with the studied focus of a man who wanted very much to be somewhere else. Ryan turned back to his steak, but a minute later, as if the thought had just occurred to him naturally, in the flow of conversation, he spoke again. How many acres does the dock property sit on, roughly? He asked, not looking up from his plate. Just ballpark. Something cold moved through my chest. Not anger, something more precise than anger. The sensation of watching a thing you suspected become a thing you knew. I had negotiated deals worth more than most men at that table would see in a lifetime. I had sat across from lawyers and bankers and developers who smiled just like Ryan Walker was smiling right now. I knew with the bone-deep certainty of 40 years of reading people on open water and in closed rooms the difference between a man who is worried about your future and a man who is calculating your value. Ryan Walker was not worried about my future. He was pricing it. Enough, I said. He looked up. Enough acreage, I said, for what I need it for. He held my gaze for 3 seconds. The smile stayed on his face, but it had gone thin at the edges, the way a coat of paint goes thin when the material underneath starts to show through. Of course, he said, and he went back to his steak. I picked up my fork. Across the table, Emma finally looked at me just for a moment, just long enough for me to see something in her eyes that I could not name exactly, but that felt like the way the sky looks in the hour before a storm moves in. Not frightening, inevitable. She looked away again before I could decide what I wanted to say to her. I ate my halibut and kept my own counsel. But the cold thing in my chest stayed where it was, precise and clarifying, like a compass needle that has found north and will not be moved. The plates were cleared somewhere around 7:45, and the room shifted into that particular looseness that comes after a good meal and too much wine. Voices, a little louder behind laughter, a little freer, the careful social architecture of the evening, beginning to soften at the edges. Ryan was in his element. He had pushed his chair back slightly from the table, one arm draped over the back of it, his wine glass held loosely in his other hand. He had the posture of a man who understood that a room full of people who have been eating and drinking for 2 hours is a room full of people who are easier to perform for. My grandfather started from scratch, he was saying to the group at his end of the table. 3 of his friends and the heavy-set associate, all of them leaning in with the attentiveness of people who had heard some version of this story before and knew their cues. Absolutely nothing. But he was smart about it. He understood that the way you generate real wealth is through leverage, through knowing which assets appreciate and which ones you leave behind. He paused, letting that settle. There's a reason nobody gets rich off manual labor, he said pleasantly. You trade your hours for money. The hours run out. That's all there is to it. His friend, a thin man with rectangular glasses, who had been introduced to me earlier as someone in finance, made a sound of agreement. Time for money is the worst trade you can make. Exactly. Ryan lifted his glass. Smart money works while you sleep. Labor doesn't scale. I was cutting the last piece of bread on my side plate when Ryan's eyes slid over to me briefly, the way a man glances at something he wants his audience to notice, without appearing to point at it directly. No offense to anyone who's built something with their hands, he added with the generous magnanimity of a man extending a courtesy he did not mean. There's dignity in honest work. Of course there is. Another pause. It just has a ceiling is all. The thin man with the glasses glanced over at me and then quickly back at Ryan. So what's your play? The associate asked Ryan. Real estate. Real estate tech investments. A couple of hospitality projects. Ryan set his glass down and leaned forward with the energy of a man who loves nothing more than talking about his own plans. The key is diversification into assets that don't require you to be present every single day. You know, and here he smiled, and the smile had an edge to it that only I seemed to be able to see from where I was sitting. Unlike some industries where the owner literally has to climb into a boat at 5 a.m. or the whole operation falls apart. The thin man laughed. My hand tightened around the bread knife. just for a moment, just long enough. Victoria, seated 2 places away from me, made a soft sound of amusement and crossed her ankles neatly beneath her chair. She reached over and touched the arm of the woman beside her, a friend she had brought along. I gathered for moral support, or as an audience, or perhaps both. Ryan's always been so clear-eyed about these things, Victoria said to her companion, not quietly enough. He understands the difference between working hard and working smart. Not everyone does. I set the bread knife down. I had 43 years of early mornings in me. I had salt water in the creases of my hands, and the memory of my wife's voice telling me the year I signed the deed to my third dock that she had never been prouder of a single thing in her life. I had hired 314 people over the course of my career, and I had paid every single one of them a fair wage, and I had never once needed to explain to any of them that what they did with their hands was less than what someone else did with a spreadsheet. I looked across the table at Ryan. He was laughing again, that easy, practiced laugh, and his friends were laughing with him, and the room had the warm, wine-soaked glow of a party going well. He looked younger when he laughed. He looked like what he probably was, underneath all the calculation, a man who had never had to fight for anything, and had decided that meant he was better than people who had. I felt something in my chest that was not anger and not grief, but some compound of both, something that pressed behind my sternum and made me breathe more carefully. And then I looked at Emma. She was sitting straight-backed in her chair, her water glass in front of her untouched. Her right hand was in her lap, and I could see from the faint movement of her shoulder that her thumb was working around the base of the engagement ring on her left hand, turning it. The slow, repetitive motion of someone who is managing something very large in a very small space. Her face was directed at Ryan's end of the table. She was watching him laugh. And the expression on her face was not the expression of a woman watching the man she loved. It was the expression of someone watching a clock. I had spent 31 years learning that face. I knew every version of it. The one she wore at 7 years old, when she was trying not to cry after a bad day at school. The one she wore at her mother's funeral, dry-eyed and determined, holding my hand with both of hers. The one she wore the day she passed the bar exam and called me from the parking lot of the testing center because she needed to hear my voice before she told anyone else. This was a version I had not seen before, and it made my heart hurt in a way I hadn't prepared for. Whatever my daughter was carrying into this room tonight, she had been carrying it for a long time. Longer than tonight. Longer than I had known to worry about. Ryan refilled his glass and launched into another story. His friends leaned in. I folded my hands on the table and waited for whatever came next. I had been sitting at that table for nearly 2 hours, and my back was telling me about it, in the way backs do when a man has spent 4 decades hauling weight on open water, a slow, persistent ache across the shoulders that no chair was ever designed to address. I excused myself between courses, not because I needed to, but because I needed air that hadn't been filtered through an HVAC system and flavored with expensive cologne. The hallway outside the banquet room was quiet. Long carpeted, lit by wall sconces spaced at even intervals that cast a warm amber light over everything and made the whole corridor feel like the inside of a painting. I walked to the far end, where a tall window overlooked the harbor, and I stood there for a moment with my hands in my pockets. Below, the dock lights were on, yellow pools of light on black water, the shapes of the boats rocking gently in the December swell. I knew every vessel down there by silhouette. I knew the sound the dock cleats made when the tide changed. I knew which slips flooded first in a storm surge and which held. I had built all of it from nothing, and it was the most honest thing I had ever done with my life. The banquet room door opened behind me. I heard it, but did not turn around. Footsteps on the carpet, quick, confident, the stride of a man moving with purpose. then the sound of a phone being answered. "Marcus." Ryan's voice easy and unguarded the way a man sounds when he believes he is completely alone. "Yeah, I stepped out. It's a whole situation in there." I stayed at the window. I did not move. I did not make a sound. The old man showed up in rubber boots, Marcus. Rubber boots. A short, sharp laugh, genuine, nothing like the practiced one he used at the table. Like he'd just come off the boat, which, knowing him, he probably had. The sound of Ryan shifting his weight. The faint creak of a leather shoe on carpet. Emma keeps saying he's just private, that he doesn't care about appearances. His voice carried a thin edge of contempt wrapped in amusement, the tone of a man who has heard an explanation he finds both unconvincing and convenient. "Sure. Private. That's one word for it." My hands tightened inside my pockets. The harbor lights blurred slightly below me, and I made myself breathe slowly, steadily, the way I breathed when the weather turned, and there was nothing to do but hold the wheel and wait. "After the wedding, I give it 6 months, Ryan said. "Maybe 8. Emma's reasonable when she's not being sentimental, and once we're married, she'll see it differently. The dock alone, Marcus, the dock alone is worth—" He paused, listening. "Yeah, exactly. And that's just the waterfront parcel. There's equipment, there's the operation itself, there are contracts in place with 3 processors up the coast." Another pause. "I've already started looking into it. Structurally, it's more complex than I thought, which is why I need Emma on board before we make any moves." My throat tightened. Not with surprise, with the particular terrible sensation of being confirmed in something you had hoped was wrong. "She doesn't know what I know," Ryan said. His voice had dropped slightly, not from caution, but from the casual intimacy of a man sharing something with a trusted friend. "And he—" A brief pause in which I understood with complete clarity that he was me. "He doesn't know what's coming." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Ryan laughed again, low and satisfied. "I didn't marry up Marcus," he said. "I married smart. There's a difference." He laughed once more at something his friend said on the other end. Then I heard him shift, heard the sound of him turning, and the laughter stopped. I was still standing at the window, my back to him, my hands in my pockets, looking out at the harbor. I had not moved an inch. But I heard him go still behind me, that sudden, complete stillness of a man who has just realized the room he thought was empty was not. I turned around. Ryan stood in the middle of the hallway, his phone held loosely at his side, his face doing something complicated and fast that he didn't quite manage to finish before he got it under control. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and neither of us spoke for the space of 2 full seconds. His eyes moved over my face the way a man reads a poker hand across a table, searching for the tell, for the flicker that would tell him how much I had heard. He found nothing. I had been playing this particular game since before he was born, and my face had learned long ago how to hold its own counsel. "Mr. Carter." His voice was steady, almost. "Getting some air. Same as you," I said. A beat. His jaw worked once almost imperceptibly. "Good idea," he said. "It gets warm in there." "It does." I agreed. He held my gaze for one more second, still reading, still searching, and then he nodded once and pushed open the banquet room door and walked back inside. I turned back to the window. Below, the harbor lights were still burning. The boats rocked in the December swell. A light was on in the wheelhouse of my oldest trawler, the one I had bought second-hand 26 years ago and rebuilt from the hull up with my own hands, the one my wife had stood on the dock and watched me bring in for the first time with tears running down her face because she knew what it had cost us and what it meant. Ryan Walker believed he was about to take all of it. I pressed one hand flat against the cold glass of the window and looked down at what I had spent my life building. Then I straightened my flannel shirt, turned away from the window, and walked back toward the banquet room door. The dessert was being set when I returned to my seat, small plates of something with chocolate and a raspberry reduction that the kitchen had clearly put considerable effort into. Ryan was already back at the head of the table, his arm draped over the back of his chair. His expression relaxed in the uncomplicated way of a man who had decided the situation was still under his control. He looked at me once as I sat down. Just once. And then he looked away as though I were furniture he had already accounted for. The room had softened over the course of the meal, voices, warmer postures, looser, the particular ease that comes when people have eaten well and drunk enough to feel generous toward each other. It was the kind of atmosphere Ryan had clearly been waiting for. The kind where a man can say things and have them land as reasonable. He reached for the wine bottle and topped off his glass, then set it down in the center of the table with a small, deliberate gesture that drew eyes. "I want to say something," he announced, his voice warm and carrying the voice of a man making a toast. "As a family." The table gave him its attention. Ryan smiled, the broad, genuine-seeming smile, the one that photographed well. "Emma and I have been talking about the future, our future. And part of that conversation has been about how we take care of the people we love and make sure everything is structured the right way going forward." He paused, letting the warmth of it settle over the table. "Mr. Carter, we think the smart move for everyone is to look seriously at selling the dock property and reinvesting in something with stronger returns. Real estate downtown may be a mixed-use development, something that doesn't require—" And here he gestured in my general direction, with the ease of a man indicating a weather pattern rather than a human being, quite so much day-to-day involvement. The table was quiet. "I don't recall that conversation," I said. Ryan's smile held. "Well, Emma and I didn't mention anything, Ryan." Emma's voice came from the head of the table level, unhurried, absolutely precise. Not loud, not heated, just completely unmistakably clear. Every head at the table turned toward her. She was sitting straight in her chair, her dessert fork set neatly beside her untouched plate. Her eyes on Ryan with an expression I could only describe as the calm of someone who has run out of patience for pretending. There was no anger in her face. There was something much quieter than anger, and much more final. Ryan's smile flickered just for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to catch it, and then he recovered with the speed of a man who had trained himself to recover fast. "I must have misunderstood," he said smoothly. "I thought We didn't," Emma said. Her voice had not changed in temperature or volume. She picked up her water glass and took a composed sip, as if the matter were entirely settled. The table remained pointed at Ryan like a compass needle that had found true north and was waiting to see what he did about it. What he did was turn to me. "Mr. Carter." His tone shifted, still warm, but with a new undertone, the register of a man moving from persuasion to pressure. "The property is aging infrastructure. I've done some research. The waterfront commercial market up here is extremely strong right now. Waiting another 5 years, 10 years, you risk the market cooling. You risk the equipment declining further in value. From a purely financial standpoint, the dock, I said, is not for sale." The words were quiet. They did not need to be anything else. Ryan inhaled through his nose, a small, controlled breath. "I understand that's how you feel right now, but it's not a feeling," I said. "It's a fact. The same way 43 years of work is a fact. The same way my name on the deed is a fact." I looked at him steadily. "The dock is not for sale, Ryan. Not tonight, not after the wedding, not at any point that has been discussed at this table." Victoria set her dessert spoon down with a precise little click. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice carrying the particular patience of a woman who was accustomed to being the most reasonable person in any room she entered. "No one is suggesting you give anything away. We're simply thinking about Emma's future. Surely that's something you want to protect as well." I turned my gaze to Victoria. "I've been thinking about Emma's future," I said, "since the night she was born. I don't need a reminder." Something moved across Victoria's face, not quite embarrassment, but a close relative of it. She reached for her wine glass and took a slow, composed sip, the gesture of a woman buying herself a moment to regroup. Ryan leaned back in his chair. He picked up his glass and held it loosely in his hand, the gesture of a man who was visibly relaxing, visibly deciding to let it go, and who wanted everyone at the table to notice how graciously he was doing so. But his eyes, when they met mine across the table, were not gracious at all. They were the eyes of a man who had tried the direct approach and was already running calculations on the next one. The balcony was not large, just a narrow strip of stone railing outside a set of French doors near the end of the hall, wide enough for two people to stand side by side and look out at the water. I had found it by accident, pushing open a door I thought led to the restrooms, and stepping out instead into the December night. The cold hit me the way Maine cold always does in early winter, clean and absolute without negotiation. I pulled in a long breath and felt my chest expand properly for the first time all evening. Below the harbor stretched out dark and wide, the dock lights burning yellow against the black water, the shapes of the boats shifting gently in the swell. I had been standing there for perhaps 3 minutes when I heard the French doors open behind me. I did not need to turn around. "You always did know when I needed air," I said. Emma came to stand beside me at the railing, close enough that her shoulder was almost touching mine. She was still in her blue dress and in the December cold. Without her coat, she had wrapped both arms around herself, not dramatically, just practically the way she had always dealt with discomfort. Find the solution, manage the situation, keep moving. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, and it was not the silence of people who have nothing to say, but the silence of people who have too much and are choosing carefully. Then I asked her the thing I needed to ask. "How long has he been talking about the dock?" Emma exhaled a slow, controlled breath that fogged slightly in the cold air. "A while," she said. "How long is a while?" She turned her face toward the water. Her jaw tightened the way her mother's used to when she was working through something painful and didn't want to show how much it cost her. "Since about 3 weeks after we got engaged," she said finally. "It started small. Questions about the property, how it was structured, what it was worth. I thought it was just curiosity. Men like Ryan talk about assets the way other people talk about the weather. I told myself it was normal. My chest hurt. Not the sharp hurt of anger, but the slow, spreading hurt of a father who is learning something he should have known sooner. And then," I said, "and then I heard him on the phone." Her voice stayed level, but something underneath it had gone very tight. "2 months ago. He was talking to someone I don't know who, and he said—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "He said that the dock was the real asset, that everything else was secondary, that once we were married, it was just a matter of time and paperwork." The railing was cold under my hands. I gripped it and let the cold anchor me. "Emma," my voice came out rougher than I intended. "Why didn't you tell me?" She turned to look at me then, and what I saw in her face nearly undid me. Her eyes were shining not with tears that had fallen, but with tears she was refusing to let fall the way she had stood at her mother's graveside 8 years ago and held herself together by the pure force of deciding to. Her chin was steady. Her voice when she spoke was steady. But her eyes were a different story entirely. Because I needed to be sure, she said. And because I knew if I told you, you'd want to do something about it immediately. And I needed Dad. I needed to be the one who did something about it. Do you understand? I understood. It took me a moment, but I understood. She was not asking me to save her. She had never in 31 years asked me to save her from anything she could handle herself. She was asking me to trust her the same way I had trusted her when she was 7 years old, and insisted on baiting her own hook the same way I had trusted her at 22 when she told me she was going to law school and I needed to stop worrying. Your mother used to say, I started and then I had to stop for a moment because the December air had gotten sharp in my throat in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Emma reached over and put her hand over mine on the railing. Her fingers were cold. She held on anyway. She used to say you built things that lasted, Emma said softly, finishing my sentence the way she had heard her mother finish it, because you never rushed. My eyes burned. I blinked once hard and looked out at the water. 8 years. 8 years since Margaret had stood on that dock below and watched the sunset with her hand in mine and told me she was proud of everything we had built together. 8 years since I had driven home from the hospital alone and sat in the kitchen until 4 in the morning because I could not make myself go upstairs to a room that still smelled like her. 8 years of mornings on the water that were the only thing I had found that was big enough to hold the grief without being swallowed by it. And here was our daughter standing in the December cold with her mother's eyes and her mother's steadiness and her mother's refusal to be broken by the people who thought they could break her. Are you safe? I asked. The question came out low, stripped down to what it actually meant. Emma's fingers tightened over mine. I will be, she said. Tonight. 2 words. Tonight. Not eventually, not soon, not when the time is right. Tonight. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her the way you look at someone when you understand that they are about to do something that will change everything, and there is nothing left to say except that you are with them. Okay, I said. She nodded once. Then she straightened, unwrapped her arms from around herself, and smoothed the front of her dress with the calm, deliberate gestures of a woman who has been ready for a long time and is simply waiting for the right moment to begin. Go back in, she said. I'll be right behind you. Emma. She looked at me. Your mother would be so proud of you, I said. She already was, but tonight she would be so proud. Emma's composure cracked for just 1 second, just one. And in that second I saw her mother's face in hers so clearly that my heart seized in my chest with something that was equal parts grief and gratitude. Then she pulled it back together, and she was Emma again, 31 years old, and entirely certain of what she was about to do. Don't let him see you watching, she said. Just be yourself, Dad. Just be exactly who you are. I turned and walked back through the French doors into the warmth of the hallway. Behind me, I heard Emma take one more long breath of December air. I did not know what was in her jacket pocket. I did not know what she had planned or how long she had been planning it, or who else was part of it. All I knew was that my daughter had asked me to trust her, and that I had never, not once in 31 years, had reason to regret doing so. I walked back towards the banquet room and pushed open the door. Whatever was coming, I was ready. The room had changed in the way rooms do when a meal is nearly over and the wine has been flowing for 3 hours. The candles had burned down to their midpoints. The centerpieces had shed a few petals onto the white linen, and the conversations had grown looser and louder, with the particular ease of people who have stopped performing and started simply existing in a space together. Ryan had not stopped performing. He was on his 3rd story of the evening, something about a development project in Portland square footage and projected returns and the particular language of men who love money, the way other men love music, fluently, and without self-consciousness. His associates were nodding along. Victoria was wearing an expression of satisfied attention that she reserved, I had noticed, exclusively for moments when Ryan was impressing someone. I took my seat at this end of the table. Ryan's eyes moved to me for a fraction of a second, just long enough to register that I had returned, and then moved back to his audience. Emma came in 2 minutes after I did. She sat down, poured herself a glass of water, and folded her hands on the table in front of her. Her face was composed. Her posture was the posture of a woman who has made her decision and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. Her right hand, I noticed, was resting close to the side pocket of her jacket. Victoria leaned toward the woman beside her and said something I didn't catch, then laughed softly. Ryan finished his story to a round of appreciative murmurs and reached for the wine bottle with the easy satisfaction of a man who had just delivered exactly the performance he had intended to deliver. Then he set the bottle down and looked at me. "Mr. Carter," he said, in the tone of a man returning to unfinished business with great patience and goodwill. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier. About the doc, about your plans going forward." He paused, and in the pause he arranged his face into the expression of someone who is about to say something difficult out of nothing but love and concern. "I want to be honest with you, because I think that's what family does. Emma and we want to make sure you're taken care of, really taken care of. And part of that is having an honest conversation about long-term sustainability." I set my hands flat on the table. "I'm listening," I said. Ryan nodded, encouraged by what he read as openness. "The commercial fishing industry in Maine has been contracting for 15 years. The margins on independent operations, smaller operations, have been shrinking every season. I've looked at the numbers, Mr. Carter. Not to be alarmist, but the trajectory is—" He tilted his head, concerning. "And a man at your stage thinking about what you want the next chapter to look like, thinking about what you want to leave Emma. Actually," I said, keeping my voice easy and unhurried, "you raised something I've been meaning to bring up." Ryan stopped. His eyebrows lifted slightly, the expression of a man who had not expected to be interrupted in this particular direction. "The operation has been running into some difficulties recently," I said. "Equipment failures over the last 2 months. One of the main processing units on the largest boat went down in October, and the repair costs were higher than I'd anticipated. Combined with a weaker season—" I let that land, then continued. "I may need to take out a second loan against the dock property to cover the shortfall, a substantial one, and the bank is asking for a co-signer." The table went very still. For those who might not know how this works, when a bank asks for a co-signer on a secured loan in the United States, it means they want another person to take on legal responsibility for the debt alongside the primary borrower. If the borrower can't pay, the co-signer pays. It is not a formality. It is a binding financial commitment. I watched Ryan's face in the 2 seconds after I finished speaking. There it was, the thing I had been looking for. A pause. Small, controlled, almost invisible. But I had spent 40 years reading weather on open water and reading men across negotiating tables, and I did not miss it. His eyes moved to Emma just briefly, just for a fraction of a second, not with concern, not with the reflex of a man thinking about how to help the father of the woman he loved. With calculation. Pure and uncomplicated calculation. Then he looked back at me, and the concerned expression returned, slightly warmer this time, slightly more carefully arranged. "That's concerning," he said. "How much are we talking about?" "Enough that I can't handle it alone," I said. "I'd need family to step in." Victoria's hand moved to Ryan's forearm. The touch was light, quick, gone in an instant, but I caught it. The touch of a woman telling her son something with her fingers that she did not want to say out loud in a room full of people. Ryan cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, I have to be honest. His voice had shifted again, still warm but with a new register beneath it, the register of a man delivering unwelcome news with great regret and absolutely no remorse. Taking on debt, co-signing a loan of that kind, it's a significant legal and financial commitment. Emma and I are just starting out. We have our own obligations, our own plans. And I think, and I say this with the greatest respect, that co-signing a loan on an operation that is already struggling financially might not be the most responsible thing for us to consider. He paused. Let that breathe. Which is why, he continued, and his voice had gone gentle now, gently implacable, the voice of a man delivering a mercy. I keep coming back to the idea of liquidating the property while the market is still favorable. It would clear the debt entirely, give you real financial security, and free Emma and me from having to navigate these kinds of complications going forward. There it was. Not, how can we help you keep it? Not, what do you need? Let's figure this out together. The moment I told him there was debt, the first word out of his mouth wrapped in concern and reasonableness, and the language of family was sell. I looked at Ryan Walker across the table. I looked at the careful arrangement of his face, the practiced warmth in his eyes, the way his hand rested on the tablecloth, with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed he had just made an irrefutable point, and I felt the cold thing in my chest settle into something final and absolute. Not anger, not grief, just certainty. I had given this man every opportunity to show me I was wrong about him. I had sat at the end of his table and let him question me and maneuver around me and smile at me with those calculated eyes. I had walked out to a cold hallway and listened to him describe my daughter as a transaction. I had come back and watched him work his way through the evening with the patient, cheerful ruthlessness of a man who had never once considered the possibility that someone he was underestimating might be watching him just as carefully as he thought he was watching them. And now I had handed him the simplest possible test, the test that any decent man, any man who actually loved Emma, would have answered without a moment's hesitation, and he had failed it in under 90 seconds. I nodded slowly, as though considering what he had said. Across the table, Emma's right hand moved, slowly, quietly, without drawing attention. It came to rest against the outside of her jacket pocket, and I felt for the first time all evening the particular stillness that comes just before something that has been building for a very long time finally arrives. Before I tell you what Emma did next, nothing about the next few minutes went the way Ryan Walker expected. Drop a 2 in the comments right now so I know you're still here with me. One thing before we continue, parts of this story have been shaped for meaningful storytelling. Some details may not have unfolded exactly this way in real life. If that's not for you, no judgment at all. For everyone staying, hold on. Ryan had just refilled his glass for the 4th time that evening when Emma put her water glass down. Not pushed it aside, not set it down carelessly. She placed it on the table with the quiet, deliberate finality of someone who has been using it to keep her hands occupied and has just decided she no longer needs to. The sound it made, barely a sound at all, cut through Ryan's story, the way a single note cuts through noise. She stood up. The movement carried no urgency, no announcement of itself. It was simply a woman rising from her chair with the unhurried certainty of someone who has rehearsed nothing because she has simply decided. Decision has its own frequency that fills a room before a word is spoken. Ryan was mid-sentence when she rose, something about square footage, something about projected returns, and he kept talking for one full beat after Emma was on her feet, before the words dried up completely in his throat. I have something I'd like to share with everyone, Emma said, before the evening ends. Her voice was not loud. It carried across the entire banquet room with the clean clarity of a voice that has stopped managing itself and is simply saying what it means. The conversations at the nearest tables faltered. Heads turned. The room gathered itself toward her, the way a harbor gathers toward a light, when the fog comes in not because it was told to, but because something real was happening, and every person could feel it before they understood it. Ryan set his wine glass down. The practiced smile returned immediately, automatic, reflexive, buying him 2 seconds of assessment. What are you, Ryan?" She said his name the way I used to say it to deckhands who had started moving in a direction I needed them to stop. Not sharp, not loud. Absolute. "Please sit down." Ryan's smile held, but it had gone rigid at the edges, the way a mask goes rigid when the face underneath is doing something different. He sat slowly, eyes on Emma, a man recalculating in real time. Emma's right hand moved to the side pocket of her jacket. She drew out her phone with the steadiness she had been carrying all evening. Not the forced steadiness of someone fighting nerves, but the natural steadiness of someone who had moved past nerves weeks ago, in the quiet of her own apartment, in the late-night hours when she had made every decision tonight was built upon. Night was built. She tapped the screen twice and held the phone toward the display panel at the front of the room. The large flat screen that had shown smiling photographs of Ryan and Emma during the cocktail hour. The screen flickered, shifted, and filled with a mirror of Emma's phone. Clean, bright, waiting. Victoria pushed back from the table and rose with the swiftness of a woman who has spent a lifetime using physical presence as authority. Her chest swelled with the indignation of someone who believed her position in a room had just been challenged by a person without the standing to do so. "Emma, I don't know what this is supposed to be, but I think we should all take a moment. Mrs. Walker." Emma's eyes moved to Victoria with a composure so complete it stopped the older woman the way a wall stops movement. "I'll ask you to sit down as well." Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. Her perfectly maintained fingernails pressed into the tablecloth, and she stood there for one long, extraordinary moment, with the expression of a woman who has never in her adult life been asked to sit down by someone 30 years younger and has no protocol for the experience. Then she sat. The room had gone very quiet. Not empty quiet, full quiet, packed with held breath and the suspended attention of 30 people who understood that something was happening they would be talking about for a long time. I could hear the building's heating system. I could hear the kitchen 3 floors below. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and deliberate, the way it goes on the water when the weather has turned and there is nothing left to do but hold steady. I looked at my daughter standing at the head of that table, 31 years old, wearing her mother's small pearl earrings, the ones Margaret had worn on our first date on the day Emma was born, on every Christmas morning in between. Emma had taken them from the jewelry box the week after the funeral and worn them on every significant occasion since. She was standing with her spine straight and her chin level, and her feet planted with the solidity of a woman who grew up on a working dock and understood what it meant to have something solid underneath her. My throat tightened until it hurt. My eyes burned in a way I had not prepared for. I blinked once and kept them on her face because I was not going to miss a single moment of what my daughter was about to do. Ryan's knuckles had gone white where his hands gripped the table edge. The practiced calm had cracked not gradually, but all at once the way ice cracks. Beneath it was something younger and rawer than anything he had performed all night. The face of a man who believed he was the most prepared person in every room he entered, and had just understood in 30 seconds that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation in this one. "Emma." His voice had shed its polish entirely. What came out was rough, urgent, real, perhaps the first genuinely real thing he had produced all evening. "Whatever you're planning, put the phone down. Talk to me first. We can work through this. Just talk to me." Emma looked at him across the length of the table. Her expression held its steady clarity without shifting. "Ryan," she said, I have been talking to you for 14 months. A pause, not for effect, just because the next sentence needed space. I think it's time you listened to someone else for a while. She tapped the screen. The display at the front of the room changed. A video file opened. The timestamp read 8 weeks earlier, a Tuesday afternoon in October. The audio came through the room's speaker system, rising slowly, and then all at once filling every corner of the banquet hall, climbing up between the crystal chandeliers and the white-draped tables. Ryan Walker's voice filled the room, the same voice Elias Carter had heard alone in a hallway, the voice no one else at this table had been meant to hear. Nothing like the warm, careful performance he had delivered all evening. Every person who had listened to him speak tonight recognized it instantly, and every one of them went still. I didn't marry up Marcus. A short, genuine laugh satisfied Private, the laugh of a man sharing something he found quietly amusing. I married smart. There's a difference. Not one person moved. The entire room had gone absolutely still, the stillness of people who have heard something they cannot unhear, and are still in the first seconds of understanding what it means and what it changes. Ryan's face had gone the color of old ash. He looked at the screen. He looked at Emma. He looked at the phone in her hand, at the faces around the table, at the door across the room, and in that fractured, rotating gaze, I watched the exact moment a man understands that the game he believed he was playing was never the game that was actually being played. His chest rose and fell. Once, sharply. The clip was not finished. The clip was 17 seconds long. 17 seconds of Ryan Walker's voice filling the Harborview Grand's third-floor banquet room, while Ryan Walker himself sat at the head of the table with his hands gripping the white linen, and his face doing something I had never seen a face do quite that fast, cycling through denial, calculation, anger, and fear in the space of a single breath. When it ended, the silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard in an enclosed space. Then Emma swiped to the second file. Emma. Ryan's voice cracked on the second syllable of her name. He shoved back his chair and stood up, his hand reaching toward the screen as though he could physically intercept what was coming. Turn that off. Right now. That's enough. Sit down, Ryan. Emma's voice had not changed in temperature, volume, or velocity. It was the voice of a woman who had already won and was simply completing the formality of demonstrating it. There's more. The second clip began. This one was longer, 43 seconds. The setting was different, a room I didn't recognize, bare walls, the sound of a space that wasn't designed for comfort. Ryan was standing his back partially to the camera, talking to someone whose face was not visible on screen. His posture was loose, confident, the posture of a man, in a space where he believed himself completely unobserved. His voice came through the speakers without distortion, without ambiguity, without any possible misinterpretation. The old man's operation is already bleeding money. The equipment failures alone have set him back 2 seasons. A pause, the sound of papers moving. Faster he's out of the picture, the cleaner the transfer. Emma's reasonable when she's not being sentimental. Once the old man is gone, she'll see things differently. She'll have to. The woman 2 seats down from me made a sound, not a word, just a small, involuntary exhalation, the sound a person makes when something hits them somewhere they weren't braced for it. My chest seized, not with surprise. I had known in the abstract that Ryan wanted my doc and was willing to be patient and calculating about getting it. I had heard him tell Marcus he had married smart. I had watched him price me across a dinner table all evening. But hearing him speak about my death, about the timeline of my absence from my own life, from my daughter's life as a logistical variable in a financial plan, made something cold and terrible move through me that I had not prepared for. My hands pressed flat against my thighs beneath the table. My jaw ached. My eyes burned with a heat that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with the specific searing pain of a father hearing his own mortality discussed as a convenience. I breathed through it, slowly, steadily. Ryan had abandoned any pretense of control. He was on his feet, his face mottled with a color I could only call desperation, his voice climbing out of its careful register into something raw and unpolished, and entirely real for the first time all evening. That recording is taken completely out of context, he said, his eyes moving around the table, appealing to anyone who would meet them. You don't understand what there were circumstances, there were conversations happening that aren't represented in... Ryan? Emma set her phone face down on the table. The first clip was from a phone call you made on October 14th. The second was from a meeting on October 22nd. One of the men in that room came to my attorney voluntarily 3 weeks ago and provided everything he recorded himself. I have timestamps, I have corroborating records, and I have 3 other recordings I haven't played yet. She looked at him with the calm of someone who has prepared for every possible response and found none of them frightening. You can sit down or you can keep standing. But either way, I'm not finished. Victoria's handbag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. She didn't seem to notice. She was staring at the blank screen with the expression of a woman whose entire understanding of an evening had just been restructured around her. One of Ryan's friends, the thin man with the rectangular glasses, the finance man who had nodded along to everything Ryan said all night, pushed back his chair slowly and quietly. He folded his napkin. He set it on the table with great care, and then he walked toward the door with the deliberate, unhurried steps of a man who had decided he was never here. Ryan's head swiveled toward him. "Derek," he started. "He can't help you," Emma said quietly. "Marcus, the man you called from the hallway tonight, is on the recording." Ryan's mouth closed. He turned to face me then for the first time since Emma had stood up. His eyes, when they found mine across the length of the table, were not the eyes he had been wearing all evening, not the calculating eyes, not the charming eyes, not the contemptuous eyes behind the warm performance. They were the eyes of a 34-year-old man who had just understood that the person he had been underestimating all night was not the old fisherman at the end of the table. It was the woman sitting at the head of it. His voice came out smaller than I had ever heard it. "You had me recorded." Emma reached for her phone again. Her thumb moved across the screen with the practiced ease of someone scrolling through a library she knew by heart. "I had you recorded," she confirmed, "for 6 weeks, starting the night I heard you tell someone that the doc was the real asset, and everything else was secondary." She looked up at him. "I gave you 6 weeks to show me I was wrong, Ryan. You used every single day of them to show me I was right." She scrolled to the next file. "This one," she said, "is longer." Ryan's hands were shaking. Not trembling, shaking the full-body shaking of a man whose adrenaline has nowhere to go. He looked at the phone in Emma's hand, then at the screen at the front of the room, then at the door that his friend had just walked through. And then Emma pressed play. The second clip did not open with Ryan's face. It opened with a room bare walls, a folding table, the kind of space that existed in the gap between legitimate business and everything else. A whiteboard with handwriting on it that the camera was not quite close enough to make fully legible. And Ryan Walker's voice coming from somewhere off-frame, with the unhurried ease of a man running a meeting he had called and fully controlled. "The equipment failures need to look accidental." His voice was brisk, businesslike, the same voice he used when he talked about development projects and projected returns. If the old man thinks his operation is collapsing on its own, he'll sell. He won't want Emma to know how bad it's gotten. That's the thing about men like him, they'd rather go under quietly than ask for help. A second voicemail that I did not recognize. "The processing unit on the main vessel is the easiest point of entry." "Then start there," Ryan said. Give it 2 weeks to manifest. I want it to look like deferred maintenance, not interference. My hands had gone rigid on the table. I had spent 43 years on the water. I had lost equipment to weather, to age, to the ordinary wear of a demanding industry. I had rebuilt engines in January cold, with my fingers so numb I couldn't feel the bolts. I had sat in the wheelhouse of my oldest trawler during a nor'easter and talked to it the way some men talk to horses, quietly, with respect, asking it to hold together one more time. And sitting in that banquet room, listening to Ryan Walker discuss the deliberate destruction of everything I had built with the same tone. He used to discuss real estate projections. I felt something move through my chest that was not anger and not grief, but some compound of both that I had no name for, a raw, searing pain that started behind my sternum and spread outward until my jaw ached and my eyes burned and my hands pressed so hard against my thighs that I could feel my own pulse in my palms. The clip continued. "The cold storage facility," the unrecognized voice asked. "After the vessel," Ryan said. "One thing at a time. I want him off balance, not suspicious." A pause, the sound of marker on whiteboard. "Once both operations are showing losses, the bank conversation happens naturally. He'll need capital. He'll reach out to Emma. And that's when we move. The shell company is ready. Walker Marine LLC. Registered 3 months ago. Clean paper trail, separate legal counsel. When the dock goes to market, we're positioned to acquire it at distressed asset pricing." His voice carried the particular satisfaction of a man explaining a plan he was proud of. By the time anyone looks closely, it'll already be done. Victoria made a sound, not a word, just a single involuntary exhalation, like a person who has just stepped on something that gave way beneath their foot. Her hand went to her throat. Ryan had pushed away from the table entirely. He was on his feet, moving toward the screen, his face flushed with a color I had never seen on him. Not the calculated flush of embarrassment or the strategic flush of performed emotion, but the real, uncontrollable flush of a man whose body was reacting faster than his mind could manage. "That recording is inadmissible," he said, his voice cracking at the edges. "You can't in Maine. You can't record a private conversation. Without there are laws. Maine is a one-party consent state." Emma's voice was patient, almost gentle, the voice of someone correcting a factual error with no desire to humiliate. "I was present for 2 of these recordings. My attorney was present with full authorization for the others. Every clip in this file was obtained legally." She looked at him steadily. "I had 6 weeks, Ryan. I used them carefully." Ryan's mouth opened and closed. He looked like a man who had prepared extensively for a negotiation and arrived to find that the other party had already read every document he intended to present. "Emma, listen to me." He changed tactics, his voice dropping, going urgent, going towards something that was trying to be intimate and landing instead as desperate. "Whatever you think you heard, whatever Daniel has been telling you." He stopped. His eyes moved to the door, and that was when I saw him for the first time, the man who had been standing just inside the banquet room entrance for the last several minutes, his briefcase at his side. His expression composed with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting a long time for a moment and has no intention of rushing it now that it has arrived. Daniel Brooks was 60 years old, trim and precise in a dark suit that had been neither expensive nor cheap, the suit of a man who had long since stopped needing his clothes to make a statement on his behalf. He had the kind of face that courtrooms produced over decades, patient, unreadable, with eyes that had heard a great many things and been surprised by very few of them. He was Elias Carter's personal attorney. He had been reviewing Ryan Walker's activities for the past 4 months, working with a licensed private investigator, whose methods were, as Emma had just confirmed, entirely within the bounds of Maine law. Daniel walked to the table without hurrying. He set his briefcase down beside Emma, opened it, and removed a large manila envelope thick secured with a clasp, with nothing written on the outside. He set it on the table in front of Emma. Then he turned to Ryan, and when he spoke his voice had the quiet authority of a man who has never needed volume to be heard. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I represent Carter Ocean Holdings. I believe you may be familiar with the name." Ryan stared at the envelope. Something shifted in his face, something that started as confusion and was moving rapidly toward a much more complicated place. "Carter Ocean Holdings," he repeated slowly. That's Elias's." He stopped, looked at me, looked back at Daniel. "That's just the dock, the fishing operation. That's what he—" "No," Daniel said. "It's not." Ryan's voice dropped to something barely above a murmur. "What do you mean it's not?" Daniel placed one hand on the envelope lightly, the gesture of a man indicating where the answer was kept. "Everything you need to understand about tonight," Daniel said, "is in here. But I think Mr. Carter would like to say something first." Every eye in the room turned toward the end of the table, toward the old man in the flannel shirt and the rubber boots who had been sitting there all evening. I pushed back my chair and stood up. I had not stood up all evening. I had sat at the end of that table for 3 hours in the chair they had given me in the corner they had pointed me toward, with the fresh place settings they had demanded after deciding my hands were unfit to touch their glassware. I had sat and listened and watched and kept my own counsel, while Ryan Walker worked his way through the evening with the cheerful, systematic confidence of a man dismantling something he believed belonged to him. I was done sitting. I moved away from my chair slowly, not because my body required it, though at 67 it sometimes did, but because I had learned long ago that the speed at which a man crosses a room tells everyone in it something about him. I had nothing to prove with urgency. I had everything to say with patience. The room watched me walk. I heard it, the particular quality of attention that fills a space when something unexpected is happening and no one wants to miss it. Chairs shifted slightly. Someone set down a glass. The ambient sounds of the evening, the low hum of the HVAC, the distant percussion of the kitchen, the faint movement of fabric as people adjusted their posture, all of it receded, and what was left was the soft, steady sound of my rubber boots on the banquet room carpet as I walked from one end of the table to the other. Ryan Walker watched me come. I saw it happen in his face, the thing I had been watching him manage all evening. The careful architecture of his expression began to fracture. Not dramatically, not all at once. The way old timber fractures in a storm, slowly then suddenly, the structure giving way one fiber at a time until the whole thing goes. He took one step backward. Involuntary. I don't think he was aware he did it. I stopped beside Daniel. I looked at Ryan across the width of the table, and I took a moment, just a moment, to look at him the way I might look at weather coming in off the water. Reading it. Letting it be what it was. Then I spoke. "Carter Ocean Holdings," I said, "is the company I founded 31 years ago, with one boat, one dock slip, and a loan I paid back in full 18 months ahead of schedule." My voice came out even, quiet. The voice I used on the water when the weather had turned and there was work to be done, and panic was a luxury no one could afford. It currently operates 6 marine logistics facilities, 4 cold storage installations, and 14 working docks between Gloucester and Eastport. I paused. The land this hotel is built on belongs to Carter Ocean Holdings. The dock you can see from that window belongs to Carter Ocean Holdings. The cold storage facility 3 miles up the coast that you instructed someone to sabotage, I held his gaze without blinking, also belongs to Carter Ocean Holdings. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the candles burning. Ryan's face had passed through white and arrived somewhere beyond it, a color that had no good name, the color of a man whose understanding of an entire evening has just been restructured around a fact he cannot process. His mouth worked. Words formed and dissolved without making sound. Daniel opened the manila envelope and began laying documents on the table with the measured efficiency of a man who had organized this presentation many times in his mind and was now simply executing it. "The first document," Daniel said, addressing the room with the calm clarity of someone making a presentation to a board, "is the Certificate of Incorporation for Walker Marine LLC, registered in the state of Maine 11 weeks ago. The registered address is Mr. Walker's personal residence. The stated purpose of the company is commercial marine property acquisition." He set it down, moved to the next. "The second document is a series of emails recovered from Mr. Walker's personal server with his knowledge and participation, I should note, as they were provided to us by an individual who was party to the communications detailing the specific instructions given for the mechanical interference with Carter Ocean Holdings' primary processing vessel in October of this year." Ryan's hand shot out toward the documents. "You can't just, they are admissible," Daniel said without looking up. "I'd encourage you to consult your own attorney before making further statements." He laid down the third document. "This is a sworn statement from the individual who carried out the interference with the cold storage facility. He provided this statement voluntarily in the presence of a notary on December 1st, 4 days ago." Daniel finally looked up directly at Ryan. "He has agreed to cooperate fully with law enforcement." Victoria made a sound that I can only describe as the sound a person makes when the floor they were standing on reveals itself to have been hollow all along. Her hands went to the edge of the table, gripping it, and she sank back into her chair with the slow, uncoordinated movement of someone whose legs have stopped cooperating. Her face, for the first time all evening, held no performance in it whatsoever, just a pale, stunned vacancy, the face of a mother who has just understood the full scope of what her son has done. "Ryan." Her voice came out thin, frightened, nothing like the composed, cutting voice she had been wielding all evening. "Ryan, don't say anything else." Ryan didn't seem to hear her. He was staring at the documents on the table, at his own name on the LLC registration, at the email printouts, at the sworn statement, with the fixed, unblinking stare of a man who has walked into a room expecting one thing and found something else entirely and cannot yet make his mind accept the substitution. "This isn't," he started. Stopped. Started again. "You had no right to, Mr. Walker." Daniel's voice was patient and final, the voice of a man closing a door. "You are currently facing potential charges of criminal property destruction, conspiracy fraud, and forgery under Maine law. I would strongly recommend that you stop speaking and contact legal representation immediately." He paused. "I would also recommend that you not attempt to leave the state of Maine until this matter has been formally reviewed by the appropriate authorities." I looked at Ryan. He was 34 years old, and he was standing in the middle of a room full of people who had watched him perform all evening, and every document on that table had his name on it, and there was nowhere left to go. His eyes came to mine, and in them, beneath the fear, beneath the calculation that was still trying to find an angle even now, I saw something I had not expected to see. He looked young, genuinely terribly young, like a boy who had been playing a game he didn't fully understand and had just realized too late that the stakes were real. I felt no satisfaction in it. What I felt was something older and quieter than satisfaction, the particular heaviness of a man who hoped he was wrong about someone and was not. Daniel set one final document on the table and looked at Ryan. "There is one more thing," he said. "The last page." Ryan looked at the document. He looked at his own name at the top of it. And for the first time all evening, his hands, those smooth, uncalloused hands that had never pulled a net, or repaired an engine, or held a rope in January cold, began to tremble. Daniel laid out the documents one by one. Not quickly, not with any desire to perform or to dramatize. He set each one down the way a man sets tools on a workbench, precisely, deliberately, in the order they would be needed. He had the hands of someone who had done this many times and understood that the weight of what he was presenting did not require embellishment. Ryan watched each document land on the white linen, like a man watching the tide come in and understanding too late that he had built on sand. "The first document you've already seen," Daniel said. "Walker Marine LLC registered 11 weeks ago at your home address stated Purpose Marine Property Acquisition." He moved it to one side. "The second is the email chain between you and the individual you retained to carry out the interference with Mr. Carter's processing vessel. The emails were sent from your personal account across state lines, which elevates this matter from a state property crime to a potential federal wire fraud charge under Title 18 of the United States Code." Ryan's head snapped up. "Wire fraud. That's a completely different—" "It carries a maximum sentence of 20 years, Daniel said in the tone of a man providing a weather forecast. Factual, unhurried. "I mention it not to alarm you, but because I think it's important you understand the full landscape of what you're looking at tonight." He set down the third document. "This is the sworn statement from the individual who physically carried out the sabotage of the cold storage facility. He came to us voluntarily December 1st, 4 days ago, in the presence of a notary public. His statement covers both incidents, the processing vessel in October and the cold storage unit in November. He has identified you by name as the person who retained him and provided specific instructions." Daniel paused. "Under Maine law, a person who directs another to commit criminal property destruction faces the same criminal exposure as the person who physically carries it out. That is Title 17A, Section 151, conspiracy." A sound came from Victoria's end of the table, not a word, just the sound of air leaving a person's body when something has knocked it out of them. She had pressed both hands flat on the tablecloth in front of her, and her arms were trembling with the effort of holding herself upright. Her face had gone past pale into something I had no word for the face of a woman whose understanding of her own son had just been revised in a way she would never fully recover from. "And the fourth." Daniel placed the final document in front of Ryan. "These are the prepared transfer instruments. Drafted under a law firm in Portland that, I should note, has no knowledge of the fraudulent purpose for which they were intended. The documents were designed to transfer controlling interest in Carter Ocean Holdings' dock properties to Walker Marine LLC within 90 days of your marriage to Emma Carter." He looked at Ryan directly. "Forgery of legal instruments with intent to defraud Maine Title 17A. Section 703, a Class C felony." Ryan stared at the document. His name was on it in 3 places. The signature line at the bottom was blank, waiting for Emma's hand, the hand that would never touch it now. "These are—" "I want an attorney," Ryan said. His voice had shed every layer of polish it had carried all evening. What was left underneath was something younger and rawer than anything I had heard from him, the voice of a man who had run out of performances and was left with only himself. "I'm not saying anything else without an attorney present." "That is absolutely your right," Daniel said. "I'd encourage you to exercise it." He closed his briefcase with a soft, final click. "To be clear for everyone in this room, the criminal charges I've described will be filed with the Cumberland County District Attorney's Office. Law enforcement will follow their own process and timeline. Tonight is not an arrest. Tonight is simply the moment at which Mr. Walker becomes aware of the full extent of his legal exposure. He looked at Ryan steadily. I would strongly advise you not to leave the state of Maine while this matter is under active investigation. If you choose to do so, that decision will be noted and may be used to support a request for emergency measures with the court. The last of Ryan's friends, a younger man who had barely spoken all evening, pushed back his chair and walked to the door. He didn't look at Ryan. He didn't say goodbye. He simply left, and the sound of the door closing behind him was the quietest, most definitive sound in the room. Ryan looked around the table, at the empty chairs, at the documents laid out in front of him, at Emma, who was standing with her hands folded and her chin level, and her eyes dry, not because she wasn't feeling anything, but because she had spent months feeling it privately and had nothing left to perform for anyone. Then he looked at me. You knew, he said. His voice cracked on the second word. This whole time. You knew everything. I looked at him across the width of that table. I thought about the right thing to say, the precise, true thing, the thing that was neither cruel nor false. I knew who I was, I said. You just never asked. Ryan's jaw worked. Something moved through his face that I had not expected to see. Not anger, not calculation, but something closer to the look of a man who has just understood that the person he was trying to take from was never the person he thought he was taking from, and that every step of his plan had been built on a misreading so fundamental that there was nothing left to salvage. He opened his mouth to speak again, and that was when the door opened. I heard the footsteps before I saw the person. A particular rhythm, the gait of someone who had spent decades on a moving deck and had never quite lost the slight forward lean that open water puts in a man's posture. I knew that walk. I had known it for 30 years. I turned toward the door, and something in my chest loosened for the first time all evening. Captain Harold Mason had not changed in the 3 years since I had last seen him at the association's annual meeting in Rockland. He was 68 years old, broad through the shoulders, with a weathered face that the Maine coast had been working on since he was 16, and a gray beard that he had been wearing since before it was fashionable. He was dressed in a clean flannel shirt and dark canvas work pants, and he was wearing rubber boots. He walked into the Harborview Grand's third-floor banquet room with the unhurried confidence of a man who had navigated heavier weather than this and was not particularly impressed by crystal chandeliers or white linen tablecloths. Harold Mason was, among other things, the chairman of the Maine Commercial Fishermen's Association, the organization that represented independent fishing operations across the entire state that lobbied in Augusta on behalf of working watermen, that had been the first call for 47 families in the winter of 2009 when the storm came through and took everything. He was also the man who had stood on my dock in the aftermath of that storm and shaken my hand and told me in the plain, unadorned way he said everything, that what I had done was right. He surveyed the room with the calm, thorough gaze of a man taking stock of conditions before he committed to a course of action. His eyes moved across the documents on the table, across Ryan's face, across Victoria's shaking hands, across Emma standing straight-backed at the head of the table. Then they found me, and the lines around his eyes deepened slightly, in the way they did when Harold Mason was as close to smiling as he ever got in a serious situation. Heard there was some trouble, he said. Nothing that isn't being handled, I said. He nodded once as though that were all the update he required. Then he turned to face Ryan, and when he did, the almost smile was gone entirely. Young man, Mason said, his voice carrying the particular weight of someone who has earned the right to use that phrase. My name is Harold Mason. I'm the chairman of the Maine Commercial Fishermen's Association. He let that land for a moment. I've known Elias Carter for 30 years. I know what he's built, I know how he built it, and I know what kind of man he is. He took a step forward. I'm going to tell you one thing, and I'm going to tell it to you in front of everyone in this room, because I think it matters that people hear it. Ryan stood very still. For the first time all evening, he had nothing to arrange his face into. He was simply standing there absorbing. The winter of 2009. Mason said, "A nor'easter came through this coast that was the worst in 40 years. 12 independent fishing operations between Gloucester and Eastport lost equipment, lost vessels, lost dock infrastructure. 4 of them lost everything, boats, gear, lease agreements, all of it. We're talking about families that had been working this water for 3 and 4 generations." He paused. The association did what it could. State emergency funds were applied for. Insurance claims were filed. But you know how those things move slowly with conditions and exclusions and processing times that don't account for the fact that a man with 4 kids can't wait 8 months for a decision. The room was very still. Mason's voice did not rise. It did not need to. Elias Carter contacted me 2 weeks after the storm. He had already identified the 12 operations that had taken the worst damage. He had already spoken personally to each family. He covered the immediate costs, equipment repairs, dock restoration, lease guarantees for 47 people. Mason looked at Ryan steadily. He did not take credit for it. He did not put his name on a press release or call the Portland paper. He did not ask for anything in return. He just did it, and then he went back to work. A pause. I only found out the full extent of it 6 months later when one of the families told me. My throat had closed. My eyes were burning in a way I had not expected, not with grief, but with something that had no clean name, the feeling of hearing a chapter of your own life described by someone who was present for it, in a room where you had just been called a filthy old man who didn't belong. I pressed my lips together and looked out at the harbor through the tall windows. The dock lights were still burning. The boats were still rocking in the December swell. 47 families. I had not thought about that winter in a long time. "The man you refused to drink from the same glass as tonight," Mason said, his eyes still on Ryan, "is the reason 14 of those families still have working operations today. He's the reason 3 kids went to college who wouldn't have otherwise. He's the reason—" Mason stopped and something moved briefly across his weathered face, something that was not quite emotion, but was adjacent to it, the look of a man who has seen enough of the world to be moved by things that deserve it. "He's the reason Harold Mason still has a dock to come home to if you want the full truth of it." Ryan's face had gone through several things in the last 60 seconds. What it had arrived at now was something I had not expected, and did not know what to do with a look of genuine, undefended shock. Not the shock of someone caught. The shock of someone who has just understood something true about a person they profoundly misjudged, and who is feeling the full weight of that misunderstanding for the first time. His voice, when it came, was barely above a murmur. "I didn't know." "No," Mason said. "You didn't, because you never asked." He glanced at me. "Sorry I'm late, Eli." "You're right on time," I said. Mason moved to stand beside me, and for a moment, the two of us simply stood there, 2 old men in rubber boots, in a room full of people who had spent the evening deciding we didn't belong in it. Ryan looked at me. His hands had stopped shaking and gone still in the particular way hands go still when the body has run out of adrenaline and is simply waiting for whatever comes next. He opened his mouth, and then the door opened again. I recognized the man who walked through it immediately, though I had only met him twice before, and neither time in this room. Graham Aldridge, the Harborview Grand's general manager, moved across the banquet room floor with the composed, purposeful steps of a man who understood exactly why he was here and had been waiting for the right moment to arrive. Graham Aldridge was 55 years old, trim and precise in the dark suit of a man whose entire professional existence was built around ensuring that other people's experiences unfolded exactly as they should. He had managed the Harborview Grand for 11 years. He was, in my experience of him, a man of few unnecessary words and considerable competence. He walked directly to me, not to Ryan, not to Emma, not to Daniel or Mason or any of the people who had been standing at the center of the evening's events. He walked to the end of the table to the man in the flannel shirt and the rubber boots, and he extended his hand with the straightforward respect of someone who had been waiting for the right moment to do exactly this. "Mr. Carter," his voice carried across the room without effort, "I apologize for not coming up sooner. Welcome back to the Harborview." I shook his hand. "Thank you, Graham." I had met Graham Aldridge twice before tonight. The first time, this building had been a steel frame and a concrete foundation and a view of the harbor that I had stood in front of for 20 minutes, deciding whether the ground lease terms were right. The second time, we had sat across a table from each other and signed an agreement that would give the Harborview Grand the right to build and operate on Carter Ocean Holdings land for 75 years. A ground lease, the kind of arrangement in which a company builds what it builds on land it does not own, and the landowner collects lease payments for the duration, and at the end of the term, everything returns to the ground beneath it. Ryan Walker had been staring at Graham and me with the expression of a man watching a conversation happen in a language he almost spoke but couldn't quite follow. "What is this?" Ryan's voice came out unsteady. "Who are you?" Graham turned to face Ryan with the composed, unhurried manner of a man who had handled difficult guests in difficult situations for more than a decade and was not remotely intimidated by this one. "My name is Graham Aldridge," he said. "I'm the general manager of this hotel." He paused for a single beat precisely long enough. "The Harborview Grand is built on a 75-year ground lease. The land beneath this building belongs to Carter Ocean Holdings." Ryan's face went through something I had never quite seen before. Not a single expression, but a sequence of them moving through him like weather, each one replacing the last before it could fully form. Confusion first, then the beginning of understanding, then something that looked like the physical sensation of a floor giving way. His eyes moved to the window. Through the tall glass panels, the harbor spread out below the dock lights, burning yellow against the black water. The boats rocking in their slips, the whole familiar geography of a working waterfront at night. I watched Ryan look at it. I watched him understand for the first time what he was actually looking at. "The dock," Graham said, following Ryan's gaze with the calm precision of a man reading from a document he had memorized. "Visible from this window, Carter Ocean Holdings. The cold storage facility 3 miles north up the coast, Carter Ocean Holdings." He paused. "The parking structure where you left your vehicle this evening, Mr. Walker, Carter Ocean Holdings land." Ryan's hand came up and gripped the back of the nearest chair. His knuckles went white. He was breathing through his mouth in the shallow, rapid way of someone whose body was processing something faster than his mind could manage. "The carpet under your feet," Graham continued, his voice carrying no satisfaction, no cruelty, just the flat, unadorned weight of fact. "The chandeliers above your head, the wine you've been drinking from cellar stock. We've built over 11 years. All of it exists on land that Mr. Carter's company has owned since before the foundation of this building was poured." Victoria had both hands pressed against her mouth. Her eyes were moving between Graham and me and the window, and the documents still spread across the table, and what was in them was something I had no desire to look at too directly. A mother's face in the moment she understands what her son has done and cannot find a single thing to say about it. Ryan turned to look at me. The transformation that moved across his face in that moment was the most complete thing I had witnessed all evening. Every layer that had been carefully constructed over the course of the night, the charm, the confidence, the practiced warmth, The calculating intelligence that sat behind all of it, every layer came away at once. What was left was a 34-year-old man standing in the middle of a room that he had used as a stage for his own performance, understanding that the stage itself belonged to the man he had placed at the end of the table. His voice, when it came, was barely a sound. "You knew, when I knocked over your wine glass, when I had the place settings changed, when I told you the dock wasn't worth keeping." He swallowed. "You knew all of it this whole time and you just sat there." I looked at him steadily. "You asked me earlier tonight," I said, "how long a man my age can keep running an operation like mine." I took a breath. "The answer is as long as he wants to." Ryan's chin dropped. His shoulders, which had been held with such deliberate ease all evening, curved inward for the first time, the involuntary posture of a man whose body has stopped performing and started simply existing in the aftermath of something. He took a step toward me. His voice dropped to something I had to work to hear. "Mr. Carter, He stopped. Started again. "I need you to understand that there are things I didn't mean for any of this to." I raised my hand. Not sharply, not with anger, just up gently, the way you signal to someone on a boat that you've heard enough and the conversation is over. Ryan stopped. I looked at him for a long moment, at this young man who had spent an entire evening dismantling his own future with such thoroughness and such confidence, and I felt something that surprised me with its quietness. Not triumph, not relief, just the particular heavy tiredness of a man who has been right about something he desperately wished he had been wrong about. I turned toward Emma. She was standing at the head of the table where she had stood all evening, straight-backed and composed, but something in her face had shifted the careful architecture of the last few hours, beginning finally to soften at the edges. Her right hand moved to her left. Her fingers found the diamond ring on her finger, and the room watched. Emma slid the ring off her finger the way she did everything, without theater, without hesitation, with the quiet certainty of someone who had made this decision a long time ago and was only now completing the physical act of it. She set it on the table in front of Ryan, not placed it in his hand, not thrown it. Set it down on the white linen in the space between them with the gentle finality of a woman returning something that had never truly belonged to either of them. Ryan looked down at it. The diamond caught the candlelight, the same candlelight it had caught all evening, while it sat on Emma's finger and threw small points of light across the tablecloth. He made no move to pick it up. His chest rose and fell in the uneven rhythm of a man working very hard to hold something together that was coming apart regardless. "Emma." His voice cracked clean through on the second syllable. "Please." Emma looked at him with an expression that I recognized from 31 years of knowing her face, the expression she wore when a decision had been made, and revisiting it was not something she was willing to do. It was not a cold expression. It was not cruel. It was the face of a woman who had loved someone, discovered what that someone actually was, and had done the painful, necessary work of accepting both things. "I did love you," she said. "I want you to know that. For a while I really did." Ryan flinched as though the words had been something harder than words. "But you never loved me," Emma continued. Her voice was steady, but something in it had gone thin, the way a voice goes thin when it is carrying more than it is showing. "You loved what you thought I could give you. And the moment you met my father and decided he was worth less than the boots on his feet, you showed me everything I needed to know." She stepped back from the table. One step. Clean and final. I walked to Ryan then, not quickly. Not with drama, just the slow crossing of a room, by a man who has one thing left to say, and wants to say it properly. I stood in front of him. He was taller than me by 2 inches and 33 years younger, and in every conventional measure of the world's accounting, he was the kind of man I was supposed to find impressive. I looked at him the way I looked at weather, directly, without flinching. "The smell of fish," I said, "washes off after a day." I let that sit for a moment. "But the smell of greed that'll follow you for the rest of your life. Every room you walk into, every person you try to impress, every deal you try to make, it follows, because it isn't on the outside of you. It's in the way you see people. And that doesn't wash off." Ryan's eyes filled. Not spilled, just filled the way eyes fill when a person has run out of everything else and only honesty remains. His jaw worked. He pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling and breathed through it, and I watched him try to find something to say that would be adequate to the moment and come up empty. There was nothing to say. We both knew it. Daniel stepped forward. His voice was measured and final, the voice of a man closing a chapter. "Mr. Walker, I've filed the formal complaint with the Cumberland County District Attorney's Office this evening. You'll be contacted within the week regarding next steps. Until that time, my strong advisement to remain in Maine stands." He looked at Ryan with no particular emotion. "I'd recommend retaining criminal defense counsel tonight." Victoria appeared at Ryan's elbow, not the Victoria of earlier in the evening, the composed, cutting woman who had swept into the banquet room with her chin up and her judgments ready. This Victoria moved carefully, as though the floor beneath her had become uncertain. Her face was pale and slack, stripped of every performance the evening had required of her. She touched her son's arm with trembling fingers. "Ryan, we need to go." Ryan didn't move immediately. He looked at the ring on the table one more time. Then he looked at me. And whatever he had been going to say, he didn't say it. He simply nodded once, small, the nod of a man, acknowledging something he couldn't argue with, and let his mother guide him toward the door. The room exhaled. Mason appeared at my shoulder. "You going to be all right, Eli?" "I'm going to be fine, Harold," I said. "Go home. It's a school night." He made the sound that passed for a laugh from Harold Mason, a short exhalation through the nose, and clapped me once on the shoulder with a hand that felt like a dock cleat, and said everything that needed saying. Emma found me in the hallway. She wrapped her arms around me before I could speak, and she held on with the grip of a woman who had been holding herself together all evening and was now finally in a place where she didn't have to anymore. I felt her shoulders shake once, just once, and then she pulled herself back and looked at me, and her eyes were bright with tears that hadn't fallen. "Are you okay, Dad?" "I've been okay," I said. "I just needed to see." She nodded, and something in her face softened into something younger, my daughter, not the attorney, not the strategist, just Emma, 31 years old, standing in a hotel hallway in her mother's pearl earrings. "Go home," she said. "I'll call you tomorrow." I drove back alone through the December dark. The truck's heater running loud, the way it always did in cold weather, the familiar roads unspooling in the headlights. The harbor appeared and disappeared between the trees, the dock lights blinking through the branches. I didn't sleep much. I never did before an early tide. At 5 minutes past 5 the next morning, Saturday the 6th of December, 2025, I was standing on the deck of my oldest trawler, the one I had bought second-hand 26 years ago and rebuilt from the hull up with my own hands. The engine was running. The lines were cast off. The December air was cold and clean and absolute the way it always was before dawn on the water. I pulled my collar up against the wind. Below me, the dock lights were going off one by one as the sky began almost imperceptibly to lighten in the east. The harbor was dark and the boats were quiet, and the whole world smelled like salt water and diesel and the cold and the coming day. I put the trawler into gear, and I went to work. The same work I had done every morning for 43 years. The work that had built everything I owned, everything I was, everything that mattered. The work that no one in that banquet room last night with their chandeliers and their Bordeaux and their careful social architecture had ever been willing to see for what it actually was. I headed out past the breakwater into open water, and the Harborview Grand's lights grew small behind me, and then they were gone. There is something I want to say before I go. I made a mistake that night. I turned a dinner table into a courtroom, and I let my daughter carry the weight of that alone for 2 months, when she should have been able to come to her father. If I could do it differently, I would. So let me say this plainly: if someone in your life is showing you who they are, do not wait for the perfect moment to see it clearly. The people who love you should not have to become investigators to protect themselves. That is the lesson I learned the hard way, and I hope you learn it easier than I did. I have spent 67 years believing that a man is worth what he builds and how he treats the people who cannot do anything for him. I still believe that. I believe God puts certain people in our path, not to test our patience, but to clarify our vision. Ryan Walker clarified mine more thoroughly than he intended to. These grandpa stories do not come from a man who has everything figured out. They come from a man who has made every mistake at least once and is still standing at 5 in the morning, still going out on the water, still grateful for the work. If this family story reached something in you, if you have ever been judged by your boots instead of your character, share it with someone who needed to hear it today. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever been underestimated by someone who later regretted it? I read every one. And if these grandpa stories are the kind of family story you want more of, stories about dignity, about what we build and why, about the people who stand beside us, when it matters, subscribe to the channel. The next family story is already waiting. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. One more thing before you go: some of the stories on this channel contain fictional elements created for the purpose of meaningful storytelling. If that is not the content for you, I respect that completely, and I hope you find exactly what speaks to your heart somewhere else. For those of you who are staying, I will see you in the next one.